Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Greetings and good day to viewers in Pakistan and around the world. This is Haider Mehdi on my program, Haider Mehdi's Perspective. My guest today is Dr. Zafar Bangash. Dr. Zafar Bangash, welcome to the program.
Assalamu alaikum, Heather. It's always a pleasure to be with you.
Thank you very much. This program is going to be English because we're trying to address the English speaking audience in North America, Canada, and Europe, and I hope it reaches out to you. And our viewers in Pakistan and outside who are our regular viewers, we would urge them to send this video across to every English speaking person that you know who doesn't understand Urdu, because we're going to be talking about the Hamas Israeli conflict and really go back to the genesis of this issue to be able to understand why it is happening, and is there a possibility to bring it to an end. So no better than Dr. Zafar Bangash to talk about it. He's been an activist in this area for the last 40, 50 years. He's actually visited this area. He knows it really well. He's been associated with all the movements over the last 20, 30 years. So Dr. Zafar Bangash speaks from a position of great authority and uh, on-ground knowledge and information about this. Dr. Zafar Bangash, I have this little statement at the bottom which says the 1917 Balfour Declaration, the first Nakba, the 750,000 refugees, the right of the refugees not to return, the Israeli atrocities on the Palestinians across the 75 years, Gaza for 16 years, then the Camp David Accord, the Oslo Accord, all this is happening. Can you help us understand really what this issue is?
Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Obviously, the Israeli problem emerged, or, or it has existed for more than 75 years. In fact, it goes further back, as your banner shows, that in 1917, the Balfour Declaration was issued, which was basically a pledge by the British government to Baron Rothschild in order to get the Jewish population to support the British war effort against Germany, and they wanted America to join that war. And so, as a consequence of this letter that Balfour had issued, uh, essentially typical colonial mentality, promising the land of the Palestinian people to the Jewish people. I mean, there is absolutely no legal, moral, political justification for this. In fact, we can go further back. There was the first Zionist conference organized by Theodor Herzl in 1897
That's
in,
correct.
in Switzerland, in which Herzl actually talked about a separate Jewish state. I want to go even further back. In 1885, there was a convention of rabbis, Jewish rabbis, in Philadelphia, the United States, in which they categorically stated that the Jewish people are well integrated into Western societies and that they should work over there, because Herzl was basically agitating for a separate Jewish state. Of course, Herzl did not see the state come into existence, but the British, who are the perennial troublemakers of the world, they basically created this problem in Palestine. In 1917, the Palestinians were not consulted about their future, state or future division of their state. Number two, when in 1947 the UN General Assembly held a meeting in order to passed a resolution regarding the creation of the division of Palestine. Again, the Palestinians were not consulted. In fact, that General Assembly vote had to be postponed three times. And there is a British Secretary of Defense, James Forrestal, who said that the American behavior bordered on the scandalous in the manner in which America went about blackmailing various countries in order to achieve the two-thirds majority in the General Assembly in order to implement this. So we see that there has been a conspiracy going on right from the beginning. And of course,
Quick question here, Dr. Bankish. Is Was there ever a talk of creating a Jewish homeland, say in the heartland of Europe, where most of the Jews lived? Actually, I mean, we're talking Russia, we're talking Poland, we're talking Eastern Europe, we're talking Germany, Or even in the US, I mean, they had this massive continent. I mean, they could have easily carved out one state and given it to them. Was there ever any serious thought and consideration by the Zionists and the Jewish powers and their, manipulators, masterminders in the UK government at that time, and later on in the US policy making world?
Yeah, neither in the US nor Canada, Europe, they talked about this, or either, the Jewish people. In fact, there was discussion that perhaps a Jewish state might be created in, for instance, Uganda or Argentina or even in the West Indies, but never,
Oh.
ever, never, ever in the United States or Europe, simply because these people historically have been anti Semites, extremely anti Jewish. That's why they
Hmm.
perpetrated the pogroms and the Holocaust in Europe. And they
Hmm.
wanted to get rid of their problem from Europe,
Hmm.
and they wanted to transfer it to Palestine, into the heartland of Islam, so that this region would be destabilized. So it is important for people to keep in mind that never ever did the continents the idea or the thought that they should create a Jewish state or a homeland for the Jewish people in Europe,
Hmm.
North America, Canada. No, only this idea about Palestine came about because later on they found out that they could appeal to the Jewish masses, who have deep attachment to Jerusalem from a religious point of view, that this would
Hmm.
appeal to their sentiment and they'd be able to get a large number of them to come into Palestine.
So it's really interesting you talk about the anti-Semitism of the European world, which is absolutely true. The massive pogroms against the Jews across the centuries, in contrast to actually the Muslim empires like the Ottomans, who provided all these Jews safe havens in their lands against the atrocities uh, that were being done against these people. It is so tragic that the very people who are responsible for this anti-Semitism, the European, the Germans, the American, are now the upholders of Jewish Semitism, and the empires, the Muslim empires who gave them safe havens, are now their enemies.
Exactly. In fact, we can go right back. I mean, you don't have to even talk about the Ottoman Empire. We can talk about the Muslim empire in Al Andalus. In fact, the Jewish people were an integral part of that empire, in which the most famous of the Jewish philosophers and doctors, Dr. Moses Maimonides, lived there. And in fact, when there was a pogrom in Europe, it was the Muslims that gave refuge to the Jewish people from Europe into Muslim lands. That's why even to this day you find Jewish populations in, for instance, Morocco, Tunisia, etc., and as far back as Iraq, Iran. In fact, even to this day, there are at least 30,000 Jewish people in Iran who refuse to go to Israel, despite the fact that the Israeli government bribes them, wants to give them money to move from Iran and come and settle into Israel. And they refuse to go because they're perfectly happy in Iran. They have no problems. They have their own, parliamentary representatives in Iran. So in that sense, you can see that Muslims have never ever had any problem with the Jewish people as such. Their problem is with the Zionists, and Zionism is a political ideology, and that has imposed itself on the Palestinian people illegally, displacing them, ethnically cleansing them from Palestine by perpetrating pogroms against the Palestinian people as far back as 1948, murdering hundreds of them, expelling the rest of them, 750 to 1,000 to 100 to a million Palestinians expelled, who are now today living in refugee camps worldwide. So throughout history, Muslims actually provided support and protection and shelter to the Jewish people. And now you see the situation in a complete reversal, that now that these Zionists have come into occupied Palestine, that they are perpetrating pogroms against the Muslims, the very people that gave them shelter in Palestine as well.
So now let's go to the genesis of this problem, which commenced really from the Palestinian and being evicted from their lands, and the homeland for the Jews called Israel. Could you just quickly walk us through to the present time, to 7th and 8th of October?
Yes, of course. I mean, once, of course, the Israeli state was established through terror, by the way, it is very important to keep in mind, because there have been a number of documented massacres that the Zionists perpetrated. For instance, there was in Dar Yassin back in 1948 when at least 250 Palestinian men, women, and children were brutally murdered by Zionist terrorist gangs, and the others were, of course, expelled from there. 530 Palestinian villages wiped out. Also, want to point out that the United Nations General Assembly, when it passed that resolution back in 1947, November of 1947, they gave 56% of the land of Palestine to the Jewish population, which was only 30% by that time. And that 30% population, Jewish population, had also been achieved because from after the Balfour Declaration to 1948, there was massive illegal Jewish immigration into Palestine. And so 56% of the land given to 30% of the population, and 44% of the land of Palestine left for 70% of the Palestinian population. And now, of course, today, Palestinians live in Bantustans, cut off from each other, whether it's in the West Bank or the Gaza Strip, besieged horribly by the Zionists. You see, so it's important that we keep in mind that this crisis that erupted on or actually intensified on October the 7th, it's not because October the 7th. I mean, the Palestinians have been suffering this since before 1948, before Israel came into existence. So there's a very long history of Zionist crimes against the Palestinian people. Just to give you a quick, example and understanding, throughout this year, more than 250 Palestinians have been murdered by the Zionists, their army, their police, and their so called settlers throughout the West Bank. Without, there was no eruption of the Palestinians before that. So that means that the Zionists were perpetrating these crimes against the Palestinian people throughout the year, and in fact, the previous year. And Hamas and Islamic Jihad and other Palestinians kept on warning the Zionists to stop their atrocities. They would barge into Masjid al-Aqsa, the third holiest place in Islam, the first Qibla of the Muslims. They didn't care. They just, they thought that they have all the power and they can do whatever they like, and the rest of the world just turned a blind eye. And now the rest of the world is screaming murder, etc., because the Palestinians decided that they had had enough and they wanted to hit back and give a dose of the medicine to the Zionists that they have been dishing out to the hapless Palestinians for 75 years. And all of these people just ignore these facts and they just want to zero in only on October the 7th that the Palestinians struck. So that's not when the problem started. The problem has been going on. Like if in the West Bank, there are basically hundreds of checkpoints there, that the Palestinians have to go through. They are humiliated. Their women, let's say pregnant women, are being rushed to hospital. The Zionist soldiers will hold them. They are humiliating them. Many times, Palestinian women have had to give birth at the checkpoints. So you see that there have been, all kinds of horrible things that have been done to the Palestinian people. Their villages are attacked. Throughout the year, we see that there were Israeli attacks on Jenin refugee camp. There are attacks in Nablus. There are attacks in, other places in occupied Palestine, etc. So we see that there is a whole range of atrocities that are being perpetrated against the Palestinian people. And so that had become the norm. And of course, these Zionist leaders, rulers who are led by Netanyahu, an absolute fascist, supported by Smotrich and other people, Ben Gavir, etc. These people are neo Nazis. They're not human beings. They are neo Nazis. They have no regard for human life. They have openly said that we would wipe out the Palestinians. Either the Palestinians should leave this land or we are going to kill them. And they've been doing this. So I think this is something, this context needs to be kept in mind when we consider the fact that there has been a flare up of resistance activities in the past week or so.
So, you mentioned Nablus, Jenin, and the atrocities. I remember the Sabra and Shatila refugee camps. Could you tell us what happened there?
Well, Sabra and Shatila refugee camps are in Lebanon. They are in Beirut. And back in June of 1982, when Menachem Begin was the prime minister, and I want to mention that Menachem Begin in the early 40s was actually on the wanted list of the British government. He was a well known terrorist. There were £10,000 reward for his capture, dead or alive, by the British government. And so by 1982, Menachem Begin had become the prime minister of
He
Israel, and
also he also blew up the David Hotel or some.
King, absolutely, King David Hotel was the work of his terrorist gang, and of course there was the other terrorist, Yitzhak Shamir, who also became the prime minister of Israel. And incidentally, Yitzhak Shamir during the Second World War was in close contact with the Nazis. This is documented. In fact, evidence has emerged from the German consulate in Istanbul after the Second World War that Yitzhak Shamir was in close contact with the Nazis in Istanbul, urging them to continue their pogroms against the Jews so that they would be forced to come into Palestine illegally. So they are you we are talking
Really?
we are
Oh,
actually talking about terrorists, their documented evidence against them. And so these people have perpetrated horrible genocides against the Palestinian people. So you asked about, the Sabra and Shatila massacres in the refugee camps. These occurred on September the 14th to the 16th, 1982. And that was when the Israeli army attacked Lebanon. They came after the Palestinians. There were sort of, obviously Palestinian Fedayeen of the PLO in the south. They were unfortunately defeated, driven out, and then the Israeli army went all the way to Beirut. And there in Lebanon, their Christian allies, the Christian phalangists, it's a fascist group of Christian phalangists who actually perpetrated the massacres inside the Sabra and Shatila refugee camps. But the Israeli army basically had surrounded these camps so that nobody could get out of them. The Israelis at night time would provide flares so that the phalangists could see where they were going. The phalangists went from door to door. They killed men, women, and children. They killed even their animals like cows and buffaloes and horses and goats, etc. So they perpetrated a horrible massacre for 3 days, and only then the world realized as to what had taken place. And Menachem Begin says, well, they said that Israel is responsible. He said, Goyim kills Goyim, and they come to want that they want to hang the Jew. No, it was
mm,
Menachem Begin and Ariel Sharon, the butcher of Beirut. He earned this title of the butcher of Beirut who perpetrated this massacre. So Israel was intimately involved in the massacre of the Palestinian people in Sabra and Shatila refugee camps.
mm, mm. So coming to the current situation, what prompted, in your opinion, the Hamas response and resistance against the Israelis? And of course, there is this. Uh, I don't think anyone in the world uh, accepts that innocent women and children will be killed, and whoever by whoever. But I think people forget the context that when you put somebody against the wall and you leave them no option, what should they be doing, sir?
So you see, the thing is that for at least 2 years, Hamas leadership had been warning the Israelis to stop their illegal incursions on Masjid al-Aqsa. To sort of understand what was really happening, these Israeli settlers, supported by police and protected by police, they would barge into Masjid al-Aqsa. They will go inside the masjid with their filthy shoes. They would beat up the worshippers. They'll even humiliate women, rip off their hijabs, and so on, rip off copies of the Quran. This was happening constantly in Masjid al Aqsa, and the Palestinians were getting absolutely fed up. That was one thing. The other, since over the last 2 years, these Israeli settlers had intensified their attacks on Palestinian towns and villages, places like inside Jerusalem itself, East Jerusalem. Sheikh Jarrah neighborhood, other Palestinian homes were being demolished, or they were being physically evicted from their homes, and these Zionist thugs were entering and taking over these homes of the Palestinians. There are still today in East Jerusalem Palestinian families that are actually living in the streets outside their houses because these Zionists have taken over their houses. So that's one aspect of it. The other was these so-called settlers' attacks on Palestinian villages, places like Hawara, places like Nablus. There are resistance groups have emerged in Nablus as well as Jenin refugee camps, and Palestinians were being massacred. Last year, there were, I think, about 266 Palestinians massacred by the Zionist thugs. This year, the number had already exceeded 250. And in fact, even on Friday, October the 13th, in the West Bank, when the Palestinians came out to hold protests, 13 Palestinians were murdered by the Zionist settlers, thugs, heavily armed, backed by the Israeli army and the police. So you see that these atrocities against the Palestinians were going on constantly. And Hamas had repeatedly warned the Zionists that you stop these atrocities, particularly attacks against Masjid al Aqsa, or we are going to take action. The Israelis just totally dismissed them. So finally, when the Palestinians, particularly Hamas, they got fed up of these Zionist crimes, they said it's time that we take action because if we are going to die, our people are being killed, we might as well take some action as well. I also want to emphasize, there is so much propaganda, absolutely false propaganda, that the Palestinian fighters, Hamas fighters, have killed Israeli civilians. They haven't. Because, in Israel, every citizen over the age of 18 has to serve in the military. They are militarily trained. When they go into these so called settlements or kibbutz, etc., these people are heavily armed. So they are not actually civilians in the actual sense. And of course, you have the Israeli army. The Palestinians have shown remarkable courage in confronting the biggest military machine in the Middle East and have inflicted a crushing blow upon them. I also want to mention that as soon as the Palestinians launched their campaign, this operation which was called Al Aqsa
Yeah,
Storm, that
strong.
that that they were able to, create such a shock in the Zionist establishment that they had to come up with absolutely criminal false allegations. For instance, there was this false allegation that Hamas fighters had gone and they had beheaded 40 Israeli babies. Now, this was let out by one Israeli settler by the name of David Ben Zion. If anybody can Google his name and they'd find out what a nasty creature is. He has actually in the past called for wiping out Palestinians. And he was interviewed by this Israeli channel I-24, which is funded by the Israeli Foreign Ministry, and particularly this woman, Nicole Zedek. So she broadcast that. This was picked up by the Los Angeles Times, by another uh, Zionist reporter by the name of Jonah Goldberg. He published that report on October the 9th. But of course, because of social media, people started to challenge Zedek as well as Goldberg. And Goldberg or Los Angeles Times had to issue a correction to say that they have no, this information cannot be verified. And Zedek had issued a statement saying that, well, this information was communicated to me by, Israeli soldiers. But other Israeli reporters who went into these, settlements, Kafar Azza was the place where this guy David bin Zion alleged
Kafar
that
Aza, yes.
Kafar Azza, yes, they alleged that this, babies had been executed, etc., beheaded. When they went there, they said we didn't find any evidence. But it's incredible that this false information was then even picked up by the American president. I mean, how high can you get? And this guy Joe Biden on October the 10th and 11th, he repeated this nonsense of Palestinians beheading Israeli children or Israeli babies. In fact, on October the 11th, when he spoke, he said, I've even seen photographs of it. I mean,
Mm,
this is such an incredibly, such a blatant lie. And unfortunately, no soldiers, I mean, no reporters confronted him to say, well, when did you see
mm.
these pictures? It was later.
Mm.
It was later, in fact, when the Washington Post contacted the White House and said, could you please provide us some evidence that, the president saw some pictures? And then the White House had to issue a correction to say, well, the president didn't actually see the pictures. This is not correct. This is not verified. He had only spoken to the Israeli prime minister, and it is the Israeli prime minister who had told him that this is what had happened. So you see that this false propaganda, disinformation campaign was being spread because they wanted to justify the Zionist crimes against the defenseless people of Gaza so that Israel can carry out its massacres and its slaughter of the Palestinian civilians. And so they said, well, these people are animals. What do they deserve? What do they expect? We are going to kill them because they beheaded our babies. I mean, on October the 12th, the British security minister was being interviewed by Sky News, and he even came up with this ridiculous claim that the Hamas fighters had raped Israeli women to death. I mean, this is
Allah.
so scandalous.
Astaghfir. Astaghfirullah.
And that woman who was interviewing him didn't even challenge him. I mean, this is so incredible that you would think any journalist worth their salt would ask a fundamental question as to where did you get this information from? Who
Hmm,
told you this? You repeated this lie about the babies being slaughtered and
hmm,
Israeli women being raped to death. I
hmm,
mean, this is just unbelievable. But these people are liars. These people
hmm,
are criminals. They would do anything to justify their crimes. They will go to
hmm.
any length to spread these lies, and that's what they've done. But luckily, we live in the age of the social media, the internet, and this information can be easily confronted and checked and exposed for what it is.
So to wrapping up this, so two questions. One is about clearly the moral templates and the ethical templates of what is right, what is wrong, what is sauce for the goose and sauce for the gander. One set of standards for Ukraine, the another set of standards for Palestine, and the world's biggest, most powerful nations arrayed against the poor Palestinians and siding with the uh, terrible Nazi-like Zionists of Israel. So we see that happening. So the moral templates do not exist. Having seen this, where do you see this heading?
Okay, I'll tell you first of all, I think we need to make a distinction between the Western regimes, whether it's in US, Canada, Europe, etc., and the people in these countries. In fact, the vast majority of the people in these countries are with the Palestinian people. In fact, France, Belgium, Germany, they actually banned pro-Palestinian rallies, but the people defied them. They still came out in the streets. There was a massive rally in London, England. So you see that there
What's
have been
happening here, sir? I've just uh,
exactly.
I've just shown you this rally in the UK, sir.
So you see, the people are defying their governments. And so we need to make a distinction between the people and their governments and the regimes because the regimes are completely with this Zionist war criminals. And that makes these regimes complicit in the crimes that they are perpetrating against the Palestinian people. Now, where is this going to go? Let me tell you something. The Israelis are threatening, first of all, they've told the Palestinian people in northern Gaza to flee from there to go to the south. And because Israel wants to launch its ground invasion. The Palestinians, apart from, obviously some Palestinians have had to move, but they have not found any security because the Israeli Air Force is bombing them as well, even when they go to the southern part of Gaza. So, and Hamas has told its people not to vacate northern Israel because, I mean, northern Gaza, because this is psychological warfare that Israel is waging against them. Now, I have my assessment is that Israel will not be able to launch a full scale ground invasion of Gaza. And the reason for that is that if it does, it actually it's to the advantage of Hamas because I'm sure that it must have laid mines all over in that area. There will be the Palestinian fighters, Hamas fighters, snipers, and others. They would love to have a ground to ground fight with these Zionists, and you can imagine the number of Israeli soldiers that would be killed. Number one. Secondly, Hamas holds more than 150 Israeli prisoners of war, perhaps more than that, perhaps 300 or more. So that means
300.
that's another really very, very important, factor in their hand. Thirdly, I think that perhaps there may be another front opened up against the Zionists in the north, particularly from Lebanon and Syria. And I think that's essential. If that is opened, definitely the Israeli army would be defeated. That would be the end of Israel. You see, this man Netanyahu, because he has committed so many crimes inside his own country, he's actually trying to assert his sort of, position that he is a strong man and he can punish the Palestinians, etc. Because unfortunately in Israel, the left, right, center, everybody is united on killing Palestinians. There is absolutely no sort of they don't feel any compunction. So Netanyahu is actually trying to play to that constituency, although reports have emerged. There have been surveys done over the last couple of days. 56% of Israelis say that Netanyahu should resign once this conflict comes to an end, because they say that he failed the Israeli people, he failed to protect them, he has committed crimes, he has committed fraud, and he has to go. So I think Netanyahu is desperately trying to cling to power in order to save his own skin, and that's why he's perpetrating these crimes. But now the situation has arrived whereby he cannot win militarily, and so ultimately, I think if this, if another front is opened against Israel in the north, that would be the end of the Zionist criminal enterprise, and the Palestinians would be able to achieve their freedom together with all the Jewish people. I mean, the Palestinians have said that we are not against the Jewish people. We want to have everybody live as equal citizens in a country that is democratic, that is fair. Everybody is given equal rights, not like the apartheid regime of Zionism that discriminates against the Palestinian people. So, what the Palestinians are offering is equality to everybody. They don't want to get rid of the Jewish people. They say, you live with us as in the past we welcomed you here. You are welcome to stay over here. Although I know that a very vast majority of the Israelis would flee. In fact, there are reports from Israel that if the airports were open, a vast majority of the Israelis would flee the country because they don't want to live in that kind of situation. And so we see that the regional dynamics have changed, the situation inside occupied Palestine has changed, and the future looks better, despite the fact that today it's a very grim situation for the Palestinian people. But the future looks much better for the Palestinian people.
So just if I were to just part forward with a crystal ball, say 10 years from now, do you see a two-state, or do you see one state where both cohabit?
There is absolutely no question of a two-state solution. That is dead. It will not happen. And in fact, the way and the manner in which the Zionists have gone about partitioning Palestine, particularly in the West Bank, etc., and what they have done, the settlements, etc., two
Yes.
states cannot be created. There has to be a single state, and the Palestinians would say, let's have a referendum over here. Whosoever wants to stay, they are welcome to stay. Whosoever wants to leave, they can leave. But there has to be a single state, and in which Palestinian Muslims and Christians, as well as Jews, can live as equal citizens under the law. And that, I think, is an absolute distinct possibility.
Is that a possibility, a real possibility?
Oh, absolutely. In fact, many Israeli citizens themselves, their think tanks and others have said that we don't think that Israel will survive until 80 years of age, because no Jewish state in that land has ever survived for 80 years. So that is something that bears
Interesting.
heavily on them. And the way the situation has evolved today, I don't think. You see, the thing is that if once this war comes to an end, the borders are open, the airports are open, a very large number of Israeli citizens would flee because they are dual citizens of America, Canada, Europe, whatever, Russia. They'll all flee the country. So they'll be left as a minority. And if the rest of them, the Zionists, want to live, because given the divisions inside Israel, there is no hope in hell for them to be able to survive on their own unless and until they make peace with the Palestinian people. And there is a single state, a democratic state, in which Palestinians and Israelis all have equal rights.
Wonderful. That is such an amazing insight about what could possibly happen in the future. Perhaps the only solution that is possible. Otherwise, it's a never-ending spiral of violence. Dr. Zafar Bangash, thank you very much, sir, for this most comprehensive understanding of the Israeli-Palestinian issue. And we hope we will continue this series in English with you, so that the Western world, who is subjected to massive disinformation, including Muslims who are non-Urdu speaking and Pakistanis will understand it. Thank you very much, sir. Again, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless you and all your loved ones, all those who are fighting for their freedom in Palestine, in Pakistan, and other besieged areas of the world. May they succeed. And all those who have suffered and are tortured and are in jail, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give them succor and make their tasks easier. And all those who have lost their lives in this great jihad and struggle for freedom and human rights and equality, May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grant their souls eternal peace and
Amen.
happiness in the final award. Ilahi Ameen.
Amen.
And Zindabad to all the freedom fighters, to all the freedom movements in the world which are fair and free. And Pakistan Paindabad, Pakistan Zindabad. Ilahi Ameen. Assalamu alaikum. Khuda Hafiz.
Alaikum
Very
salam.
kind of you, sir. Thank you
My
so
pleasure.
much.